Right, morning. Here we are. What's the name of this place?
It's the Ruby Lucy.
Ruby Lucy All Day Bar, but actually does very good coffee and breakfast as well on Lower Marsh Street in Lambeth. And I'm here with Clair Green for today's Procurement and Finance Coffee Break in a much calmer situation than we were in when we recorded the last one online from the house, which just didn't work at all.
No, the Wi-Fi was timing out, wasn't it?
It was just awful. Anyway, much nicer that we're now here. We can have a coffee and we can have a proper chat. And what are we going to talk about today?
We're talking about why doesn't finance love procurement? So addressing some of the causes for tensions between the two departments and what we can do about it.
See, naturally, I find this quite hard to believe that finance wouldn't love procurement, but I know it's true. So, all right, where do you want to start?
So I think it would make sense to start by me asking you a question. So what in your experience, so we know that sometimes there are tensions between finance and procurement teams. Yeah. From your experience, what is it that finance teams don't like about procurement teams? What is it that they do that you think finance teams don't like?
Okay, if I was going to be completely honest, and I think about all the ways that I know I've had a bad reaction from finance in the past, either from myself or from my team, I'd probably put 6 things. I'd say, number 1, the perennial argument as to whether all my hard work is actually cost reduction or you're going to label it as cost avoidance because you don't want to give me credit for it.
Okay.
So I know I annoy you when I insist it's cost reduction. I think when I'm looking for clarity for budgets, when I don't think the budgets are right and you've put a lot of work into them, I know I annoy you when I do that. I think when we're looking at business cases for investment, particularly for new products or new services, I know that we kind of want to go with the flow, and finance asks for a lot of detail, which I think is ridiculous. I think, there is always a problem about the spend data, which I just cannot understand why you cannot get it right. But then we did talk last time in that terrible online one about an accounting data model. So I might agree that you might have a point about that. I think the vendor master, duplicate suppliers, which just makes it impossible for us to do our job and us asking for it to be right. I know that annoys you because it's maybe not your fault. I think the last one, which is more thing, often a lot of things we're trying to do when we're trying to get value, suppliers will give better terms if you can give better payment terms. And, when we ask for it, it kind of meets with a very frosty reception as to, why we can change it. So I think, I'm sure there are many more, but if I was thinking about the points of friction that most often come up, it's those 6 really.
Yeah.
So I suppose it's only fair then that I ask you, what is your perspective then on what is it that I do that annoys you so much? Not me personally, obviously, but
So I think the causes of friction between procurement and finance are they often work in silos without communicating well and understanding that both teams are and should be creating value for the organisation. So basically their objectives should be the same and aligned with the overall corporate objectives. However, often because of lack of communication and lack of regular touch points where we discuss what each teams are doing, we end up working in silos, and then conflicts of interest arise because procurement perform activities around procuring and negotiating contracts with suppliers that are upstream of finance, and then that impacts finance because let's say you might have slightly different priorities, let's say, because we haven't spoken about aligning priorities in line with the corporate strategy. So let's say, I know you mentioned payment term variation. So let's say you were talking to a supplier that the company regularly used. You knew that that they would reduce their prices and you would gain a cost saving, which is in both procurement's interest and finance interest, because we would want to saving hit the P&L. But then you go, okay, you come to finance and go, oh, we need to reduce payment terms from, let's say, 45 days to 30 days.
Yeah, absolutely.
And finance just say no. And you go away and don't know why. And you just think, so that's an example of bad communication because you haven't got the context of why. So I think it's important if you ever whenever two teams get like bad communication like that, is the onus is on both parties to understand why is this conflict arising, because in that situation it may be that there's working capital restrictions to the point we discussed a couple of coffee breaks around about how we can manage working capital better. Maybe that from a finance point of view, we're just not getting the cash in the door quick enough to be able to pay quicker. So we're not getting in for our customers. Perhaps there's issues around billing and billing processes not being efficient as they could be. So I would say if I was a financial controller, if you approached me and said, can we pay these people quicker in response for significantly better price, I'll be all up for that as long as we get the cash in the door quicker. That we can pay quicker, but if you haven't got the cash to pay, then you can't. So it's about understanding the context of the situation you're in together, being able to communicate it, because otherwise these conflicts of interest will arise, and you'll kind of just not understand each other, and kind of an animosity will grow as a result.
I get that.
So this conflicts of interest, this budget constraints, and that links to whole working capital piece, lack of communication, which I mentioned, and then the other point, which I didn't come up so much in my example there on payment term variation, is compliance and risk management. So finance teams are responsible for ensuring compliance and financial regulation and managing financial risks. For example, I suppose I could link it to, in the payment term variation, we might have being a company that has external lending and has a bank loan covenant to comply with. So it might be that we have to have so much debt to equity at all times, or some other metric that we have to comply with. So when we might say no to a request, but actually it's in the context too. We've got to manage working capital, and we've got to meet these debt to equity ratios. So that's another thing. So I think whatever the case or whatever the request is, if it's met with a no, or it's not fully explained what the context is, then my advice would be to always push for the full context of the answer, because you don't get that whether it's finance or a procurement team member. If you come away from another department not understanding why a request hasn't been met, that's only going to lead to animosity growing and a more siloed approach to working, which is in no one's interests.
So, do you know what? They're entirely fair points. We've spoken about this many times before, that actually communication is the biggest thing between the two teams. And I suppose, it comes down to that thing where it's about respecting that finance gets annoyed with procurement because perhaps procurement doesn't fully respect that finance has a job to do. It has its own appropriate boundaries that it's got to stick within, as you've described, whether they're bank covenants or limits on risk or compliance. You've actually got your own things to protect: working capital, cash flow, shareholder equity, shareholder value, and that actually it sounds like you'd love us more if we understood and just recognised that that's your side of the equation, that is your job in the business. And then if we just spoke more, we'd probably understand why they were limitations. And
I think it goes to say, if you were met by a finance team member saying no and not explaining, then that's not good communication on finance part. Equally, the onus should be on procurement. Can you explain the context a little bit for me, please, so I can understand?
To respect it when you get that explanation, that it's not just being awkward. So if we did that, you'd love us more.
Yeah, I think it's the communication is a two-way thing. So it can never just be procurement doing all the work or finance doing all the work.
Yeah.
It's got to be both parties trying to understand each other's position and how you can work together, because ultimately both departments' objectives should be aligned to the same corporate objectives.
So the key takeaway: I've got to communicate better and respect finance for doing a good job.
Yeah, respect their role in the organisation. Yeah.
Well, that's me told. All right. Well, listen, a lovely coffee break and in a much nicer scenario. And look, it'd be great if you can share your experience and perhaps some of the techniques you found to build those bridges and to ensure the love flows between two teams, which, as we've said in all the previous coffee breaks, are going to have to work more closely. And what have we got coming up next?
We've got so our next one, we're going to look at an agile way of working. So we've got a case study of ING, which is going to be an interesting one.
Right, yeah, that is a good case study. All right, well, there we go. So until next time, please let us know your thoughts, share any ideas. If there's topics you want us to discuss, let us know. And we're going to, in a agile way, hop foot to our next recording. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.